Now, 80% of the budget of the UN, 80%, goes for humanitarian stuff. What is humanitarian stuff? There are 20 million refugees on the planet. From Iraq alone, there are 2 million in Syria and Jordan. There are still refugees from Pakistan who live in from Afghanistan who live in Pakistan. There are 500,000 refugees that live in Palestinian refugee camps in the Middle East. You put them all together and there's like millions of refugees. Most are refugees from war. Some are refugees from natural disasters. The refugees tend to be about 80% women and children. Now, about 20 million. Who takes care of those people? Well, if you listen to the media, they'll tell you, well, the international community does it. Why? Because they have a thing that gets stuck in their throat. Instead of saying the United Nations, they'll say the international community, because they've been told by their editors or somebody along the line, don't mention the United Nations. Well, the United Nations has an agency called the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. They're based in Geneva. They provide food, blankets, tents, books, education, health care for the children in the refugee camps. And they organize it. They organize the non-governmental organizations like Doctors Without Borders and CARE and other organizations. Somebody has to organize that. It's all done through the UN, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Now the spokesperson, one of the spokespeople for that agency is Angelina Jolie. Now if you listen to what Angelina Jolie is saying about the work of the United Nations refugee work, you get a whole other picture. But the media doesn't pick up on that. The President of the United States doesn't come off and tell the American people what the United Nations is doing on a day-to-day basis. Besides the humanitarian work that they do with refugees, the United Nations has an agency called UNICEF. Most people don't know that UNICEF is a United Nations agency, and it works to provide health care, education, and so forth for children. Most people don't know that the World Health Organization is a United Nations agency that works on providing medicines and health care and, well, baby clinics and so forth. Most people don't know that there's a UN agency that works on population issues called the United Nations Fund for Population Activities. Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that George Bush did when he became the President of the United States was he cut out $25 million in funding for the United Nations Fund for Population Activities because conservative members of Congress had a belief, which was incorrect, that the United Nations was doing abortions. They weren't doing abortions. They were telling women what options they had. And one of those options was the rhythm method. Another option was contraceptives. Another option was condoms. Another option was early term abortions. And because of that, the president cut out the funding for that important UN agency. Well, fortunately, Canada and Belgium and Norway and Sweden, they picked up that 25 million shortfall. So what's happening at the international level is that a lot of the stuff that the United States ought to be in the lead of doing on behalf of children, on behalf of women, on behalf of refugees and so forth, we ought to be doing more. We should be contributing more to the UN. We should want the UN to be more effective. We should want the UN to be less corruptive. I mean, if you have an institution and it's a corporation and it's not fulfilling what it ought to fulfill, what do? Do you cut the staff? Do you cut the budget? Do you make it so that nobody knows what they're doing? Or do you figure out a way to positively enhance the ability of that institution to make profit and be more effective? Every business person knows that. So by keeping the UN less effective, what we're doing is we're making the world a worse place to be in, rather than a better place to be in. But it's moving in another direction. We goofed up in Iraq. We went to war when we shouldn't have gone to war. But when it comes to end it, we will bring the UN into Iraq to help the Iraqi people overcome the destruction that we have caused by being in there. And the same is true in Afghanistan. And the same is true in the Middle East, where the Israelis and the Palestinians have been fighting for 50 years. Well, who's been supporting the Palestinian refugees? A UN agency called UN Works and Relief Administration, UNRWA, has been physically supporting 500,000 Palestinian refugees in refugee camps with food, shelter, clothing, jobs, education, and so forth. Now, if they weren't doing that, you would have people that would be so bad off that the violence in that area would be even worse than it is today.